Welcome back, beloved Evergreen History of Motion Picture students. This is the Charlie Chaplin Lecture Part 2. There will probably be a Part 3. Actually, I know there will be a Part 3. But I want to get these out in increments based on my schedule. I apologize I can't do them all at once, but hopefully you guys can be flexible with that. I do appreciate it. So we started off with Chaplin's early biography and his first inroad into filmmaking in 1914. We started with his childhood and the influence of the British vaudeville music hall scene. Definitely his experience with poverty and hunger and begging, building up his acting and theatrical chops with Fred Carno, and his first exposure and steps into filmmaking with Max Sennett and the Keystone Company. Incidentally, just wanted to remind you there is a link that I posted with some footage of Keystone Cops. That's not one film, it's sort of a compilation of different kinds of scenes, but you'll get a sense of that kind of visual slapstick kind of humor that the Max Sennett and the Keystone Company was known for. Okay, so it's 1914, and he's at the Keystone Company, and he's making one reel and two reel films. Now, it's pretty amazing because he's there for about a year, and in that process, he makes about 35 films. One reel and two reel films. Now, keeping in mind the kind of stuff that we've done together as a family and that some of you have been a part of, that's pretty amazing. Now, keep in mind, they also had money and they had a studio and all of this, but man, to churn out all of that film in 1 year, and this is not uncommon for that period in all kinds of studios. I mean, they were just churning them out. If you remember D.W. Griffith, when he was working with the Biograph Company, making one and two reels, he said he was making, like a couple, every few weeks or something. And he says, I was churning them out like sausages. So a highly, highly prolific time in film production. Well, 1914, at the Max Sennett Studios, he makes Tilly's Punctured Romance, which is actually the first feature-length comedy. It actually predates Birth of a Nation for about a couple of months. So again, when people say, Birth of a Nation was the first feature, I mean, that's just actually wrong. Did it make the feature more prominent? Absolutely. But yeah, so he's making Tilly's Punctured Romance. It's not the Tramp. They put him as the Tramp on the poster, which I understand why. But his character is not the Tramp. And you notice a couple of names there on the poster there, Mabel Normand and Max Swain. Mabel Normand worked with Chaplin on a number of films there at Keystone, Max Sennett, and Max Swain. He's a big guy. He often plays either bullies or kind of sidekicks. So, with the success of this, I mean, he's ready to move on. He wants to call the shots, and he begins to get the opportunity to direct. And while at Keystone, he continues to make films and write them and direct them in a few situations, co-directing with Mabel Normand. And he's there through 1914, like I said, 35 films. And he's learning the behind-the-scenes stuff as well as the in front of the camera. When he leaves the Keystone Company, he understands the importance of having a leading lady and the importance of women in comedy. Now, Chaplin once said, all I need to make a comedy is a girl, a park, and a cop. He says, just give me those three things, and the little tramp, of course, and I can make a movie. I can make a comedy. So he understands the role of women, and women in comedy have kind of taken two different pathways over film history. You have kind of the comedienne, the one who's not the typical beautiful romantic leading lady. They can do the comedy, they can do the slapstick. Sometimes women who are seen as not the right body type tend to do well in comedy. The other type of women in comedy is Chaplin's approach, and that is they're not the butt of the joke. They're not the target of the humor. What they are foils for the men, the comic men. They are romantic foils for these men, and that's the approach Chaplin takes. It's really important. I want you to pay attention to how Chaplin depicts women, the leading women in his films, and he knew that he wanted to kind of groom and mold a leading lady, and he is working with Edna Purviance. He's definitely influenced by the role of women in D.W. Griffith's films, and the kind of women you see in Chaplin, they're blonde usually. Very, very kind. Okay, we're talking about their characters, of course, and very ethereal. It's almost like they're to the little tramp. He sees them as ethereal. He sees them as almost otherworldly. They're untouchable. They're beautiful. They're untainted, and they have instantly redeeming characteristics. And it works both ways. For example, the little tramp will see nothing but good in them. He sees the potential for good in them. Even if they're a street urchin criminal, like in modern times, even if they're dance hall girls, which would be seen as a deplorable occupation in the gold rush, or if they're social outcasts, like in City Lights, the little tramp doesn't see all of that. He sees the good. And for us as audience members, what Chaplin wants us to see in these characters is that they can redeem as well, that there is a potential for good. The little tramp isn't just fooling himself. He's not just seeing something that isn't there. He is seeing something that other people don't see. And we want to know that these characters do have goodness in them, that they are also going to see the little tramp for the good person that he is. So they almost have this angelic quality to them, certainly the way the little tramp sees them. I mean, they're just good. It's almost like their feet don't even touch the ground when they walk. That's the way the little tramp sees them. And again, they are not the butt of the joke. He's not going to have them slipping on the banana peel. He's not going to have them doing the physical humor. Oh, no, 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 no. That would be kind of degrading. Okay? So, as his popularity grows, so does the price tag. And it's pretty clear that he is not going to stay at Keystone. He wants more power in his creative control. He wants he's worth a lot more money. Okay. And at Senate, he was making $1,000 a week, which is astronomical. In 1915, he goes to S&A Studios in Chicago because they're able to give him some greater, money. He actually misses Los Angeles, so he moves the whole operation back to California after 2 films. I mean, he has that kind of pull. Pretty impressive. Then he goes to Mutual Film in 1916, somewhere around there. Yes, that is at 1917. And then he goes to First National Pictures. This is in 1918. And this is an amazing watershed moment in film history because he becomes the first artist to sign a $1 million contract to direct only 8 pictures for First National Films. This is unheard of. And again, this is 1918. Now, they're going to distribute his films. That's not the same as the production side. Because he wants total creative control and he has the means, he actually starts his own studio. He builds his own studio in 1918 for the production side. And there he's able to, do whatever he wants. He has total creative control and making bank. In 1919, he forms a new distribution company with 3 other very famous artists, and it's called United Artists, and he joins with Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, and D.W. Griffith. Douglas Fairbanks was a very famous adventure swashbuckler type of silent hero star. His wife, Mary Pickford, we mentioned before, she was an acclaimed and popular actress, did a lot of films with D.W. Griffith. And this is a publicity shot of them as they're forming, as they're announcing their formation of United Artists. I find it interesting that, again, the Little Tramp is a character. And even in this publicity shot, he's dressed as the Little Tramp. It's almost like we can only see Chaplin as the Little Tramp. We can't even see him as he really is. So they are going to distribute his films. His first directorial feature is The Kid. He's still making 1 and 2 reels and has made some finer films. And if you look at his filmography, actually, he's making fewer and fewer films over a longer period of time. Okay, he has total creative control, and he has the money, so he can take his sweet old time. He can wait until he feels he has the right idea. If he wants to do reshoots, he can do that. This is called The Kid. It's from 1921, and it was a critical success and a commercial blockbuster. It is a powerhouse feature. It, again, is the Little Tramp who takes sort of informal custody of an abandoned baby and decides to raise him. Now, he's a poor guy, but he does what he can to take care of him. And the one thing that the Little Tramp has that you can't put a price tag on is compassion and perseverance and love. Like I said, it's a powerhouse film, and great performance by young Jackie Coogan there, a kid actor who actually had a very long career in television and in film. This was a huge success. The Kid, to that date, was the 2nd highest grossing film of all time, second only to Birth of a Nation. So it was a huge, huge success. He does make another film after this in 1923 called The Woman of Paris, which did not do as well. He does not star in it. He makes a little cameo appearance. But it did establish himself as a director. Now let's make sure we understand what Chaplin is doing here with comedy. This is probably the most significant contribution that Chaplin brings to comedy. And it's a Greek word. It's called pathos. Pathos. It's where we, using the word sympathy or empathy. It means pity, suffering, emotion, that poignancy. This is one of his most significant contributions to comedy. So let's think about this. The Max Sennett type of comedy, which was a typical kind of comedy in the teens, which was the visual gag, it was the slapstick gag. It wasn't about developing character. It wasn't about developing emotion. It was kind of this thrill ride of sights and movement. And Chaplin certainly could do that. But what we see Chaplin bringing to comedy is the pathos. We become emotionally involved in these characters. He's very much about developing the character development. He's very much about developing the story. And this is a reason why there are some critics who say that there's some people who see Chaplin much more as a dramatist than as a comedian, especially going into his feature films from the 20s on. Certainly after 1940, his films have a much more dramatic feel to them than sort of the fast-paced comedy. But this is pathos, and this is what he brings to comedy, one of his most significant contributions. Two other things that I want to make sure you guys have in your notes, which I don't have a slide for, so forgive me. So the three things I'd want you to know about his contributions. The most significant is the pathos. The second is the pantomime is of the highest art. The pantomime is telling a story silently through your body, through your gestures, through movement, through facial expressions. That's how you tell a story in character. And by this point, he is at the height of that art form. And the third is he absolutely felt a responsibility and feels even more so in the next 20 years of his career that comedy should be used for social commentary. He felt a responsibility to use his films to make a commentary about social issues. And the kid, let me go back to that slide real fast. The kid is greatly influenced. I mean, a lot of his films are. But a little kid growing up on the streets, homeless, impoverished, he lived that. You know, this is a commentary about that. And you have the social institutions like orphanages and social welfare and police officers, and they're the obstacles in keeping this loving two-person family together. The tramp is always trying to dodge the cops because he's afraid the kids are they're gonna take away this kid. But we as the audience sympathize with them. We know that the kid's taken care of. We know that he's doing fine. Sound familiar, homeschoolers? Not going to get into that right now. Okay, so the pantomime is the highest art, comedy is social commentary, and the pathos. This is significant contribution. Okay, as we continue with his career, again, you have some people who say Chaplin is either a comedian who can make you cry, or he's a dramatist who can make you laugh. And I totally agree with those two statements. He really goes back and forth, where you can be laughing hysterically at the comical part of it and be heartfelt, tearing up in the next minute. Chaplin is hugely successful. There are Chaplin toys, Chaplin books, comics, piggy banks. There's a Charlie Chaplin drink called the Charlie Chaplin drink. I don't think he created that. I've never had it, but maybe you can someday order that and say, hey, waiter, give me a Charlie Chaplin. Maybe they'll know what it is. The bottom left, Chaplin appears with other Hollywood caricatures in Walt Disney's cartoon, The Polo Match. So yeah, this is the 20s, and going into 30s, he is hugely successful. Now his next film, this is his third feature film directing, is The Gold Rush, and it is a bona fide masterpiece. It takes place in the 1890s. It takes place in the Alaska Klondike Gold Rush. And the little tramp, he can go in any time frame. He can be in, if we want to have him in a war, if we want to have him in the past, he can do all of that. He's kind of like these fluid cartoon characters like Bugs Bunny, who, by the way, is greatly influenced by Chaplin's character. The Gold Rush is about the little tramp being a prospector in Alaska and trying to find his way. There's romance involved. Well, let's just put it this way. There's starvation. There's cannibalism. There's murder. There's crime. And it's a comedy. Absolutely. It is a lot of fun, and it really establishes that pathos that we talked about. Okay? So, absolutely fantastic film. Some see it as Chaplin's greatest masterpiece. So let's talk a little bit about his role as director. We talked about The Little Tramp. Let's talk about how he approached it from behind the scene and sort of his production style. He develops everything entirely in his head. He still writes the screenplays, but kind of like Griffith, because he has total creative control, he doesn't have to answer to anyone. If he wants to do it, he's got the time, he's got the resources, he's got the money, he can do it. So it's all in his head here. And if he's not ready, he won't do it. Oops. He is very methodical. He is very detailed. He knows exactly what he wants. And he is known for taking many, many takes to get exactly what he needed. There's a thing with directing called shooting ratio. It has to do with how many feet of film you record when you make it, to the ratio of how many feet actually make it in the finished film. Most feature film directors would go between like 5 to 10, maybe 20 feet of film for every 1 foot of film in the finished product. Chaplin was about 100 to 1. It was not uncommon for him to do dozens or even well over hundreds of takes to get exactly what he needed. There's a scene in City Lights that he kept on doing and redoing and changing like 300 plus times just to get exactly what he needed. So yeah, he could do that. And like I said, because he has total control, he could take breaks and he can do reshoots if he wanted to. And when I say breaks, I don't mean I'll see you in a couple hours. He might take a few months off. He might take 6 months, 7 months off because he's not quite happy with the story. He's not quite happy with where it's going. And he'll wait until he's darn well good and ready. Okay? That happened on a number of occasions. If he's not ready to make a film, he won't. Why? Because he has total control. And this is why you see that he's making films, every 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, whenever he's ready. There's a scene in one of his one-reels where he decided to, what is it called? The Pilgrim is a 2-reel film. And during the production, he had an idea that changed the relationship between the little tramp and the leading lady. And because he had this different idea, it meant that he had to go back and reshoot a previous scene because the relationship was different. Well, he could do that. And many people have said, as a director, Chaplin is not as dynamic. I don't know if I shared this in the previous lecture, but a quote from Chaplin was, "I don't need interesting camera angles. I am interesting. I don't need interesting camera angles. I am interesting." So in an age where you have, dynamic directors like Griffith who are doing these crane shots and moving cameras and editing experimentation, or what the Germans are doing in the 20s, which we haven't gotten to yet, but we will, where they're just doing amazing visual experimentations. Chaplin is very content with very simple techniques. He's much more interested in what happens in front of the camera than what happens with the camera. He wants to focus more on the story and the character, and of course him. He knows that he can drive that in front of the camera. It doesn't mean he never moves his camera. It doesn't mean he never does anything kind of creative with things. In the features that you guys are going to see on Friday, you'll see that he does some interesting work with some camera movements, with some lighting, with use of dissolves. But he's much more about what happens in front of the camera. That's his approach. 3 years later, he finally releases The Circus, which a circus in its traditional in the traditional era, it gives you so many opportunities for the Little Tramp to develop comic bits. I mean, you've got clowns and animals and crowds, and it's all a performance. And yeah, so the Little Tramp has to get a job in the little circus. And again, you've got that sense of the Little Tramp where he is a good-hearted, noble person. And a great example of the Little Tramp as a sacrificial character. No, he doesn't die. He sacrifices what he would see as something more meaningful, but he does it joyfully. Now, let's talk about City Lights for a couple of minutes, because it is probably one of the most revered films of his career. City Lights comes out in 1931. Now, that's an important thing to remember, because in 1927, in that era of 1927, The Jazz Singer is released. That's not his film. It's another film by Warner Brothers. And The Jazz Singer really is considered the birth of talking pictures, synchronized sound. And over the next couple of years, between 27, 28, 1929, and we're going to get more to the details of this later, but sound is huge. Everybody wants sound. It basically is saying the silent era is done. Now, to be sure, most of the films that come out in the early few years of sound are pretty much garbage. They really are. They're just, let's just use sound. They don't care about creating art or story and character. It's mostly about sound. And the audiences went for it. Chaplin greatly resisted sound. He understood the height of the pantomime art. And he absolutely refused for the Little Tramp to talk. He said that that's not his character. That would actually ruin him. And he decided he's going to make City Lights as a silent movie. He's going to release a silent movie in the popular sound era, and everybody thought he was nuts. Well, he trusted his guts. He could do what he wanted, and he released City Lights in this time, and it was a huge hit. It was a critical and commercial success. It does have synchronized music, which he composed. It does have synchronized sound effects, but all of the dialogue, all of those things, those are all in those dialogue cards, the title cards. And it's a touching, heartfelt story. The Little Tramp meets a blind lady in the city who sells flowers, and she thinks he's much more important and rich than he really is. And he falls in love with her. She's a social outcast, but he sees the goodness in her. I mean, look at that poster. There she is, up in the clouds, right? Remember that Chaplin woman? That's how he sees women here. Some amazing comic visual bits here, but definitely that pathos. And you see the Little Tramp at his most noble. The film is just it's funny, it's touching, it's a tearjerker. It's got everything that you want, and one of the most poignant endings in all film history. 5 years later, he makes Modern Times, and this is the last appearance of the Little Tramp on screen. It is a social commentary about the machine age, industrialization, kind of taking away our humanity. It does give him an opportunity to get some political commentary in there. It also has the title cards. It does have some synchronized dialogue, but not the Little Tramp. There is a part where the Little Tramp has a waiter job, a singing waiter job, and he's very nervous about going out and doing his first song. So he writes the lyrics on his wrist cuffs. But as he goes out there, he's kind of flinging his arms around, getting ready to sing. And while he's flinging his arms around, the cuffs go flying. When he gets ready to sing and he looks down at his wrists, oh boy, no more lyrics. So he has to make up the lyrics. So he sings, kind of, in this like fake French, uh, French, English, gibberish type of language. Again, it makes no sense, but it is absolutely hilarious. And you have the ending scene, the ending shot in that bottom left, I'm sorry, the bottom center, where he and Paulette Godard are it's the morning and looking for new opportunity and walking down the road into the sunrise and fade out. And the little tramp goes off into film history. He will not appear on screen as the little tramp again, but he definitely will continue his foray into feature films and getting much more into social commentary. Nothing could be truer about that than The Great Dictator. Here, Chaplin plays two parts. He plays dictator Hinkle of Tomania, and another part as a Jewish barber. So he's not playing the little tramp. This is clearly a commentary on his times. World War II had already begun. The United States was not in World War II, but actually took an isolationist view. At that time, we did not want to get involved. It was because Pearl Harbor happened that we were sort of, we had no choice. There was no choice in our response. So this is clearly an attack on Hitler and trying to make him just a buffoon. And at the same time, an opportunity for him to, for Chaplin to have his political views voiced. And he is not subtle, absolutely not subtle. So basically what happens in this story is Hinkle is told by his advisors that there's a danger, he needs to get out, and they need to find a double. So they need to find somebody who looks like him who will stay in his place. Well, they find this Jewish barber who, of course, he has no name, or he's not named, and he has to kind of keep that under wraps because he knows that would be dangerous to reveal. There's a few wonderful, famous scenes here. There's a scene from the left where Chaplin, as Hinkle, is doing this ballet-type dance with this globe as a balloon, where it really symbolizes how he just sees the world as his plaything. It's his. I'm just going to dance with it. There's another great scene from the top right where Hinkle is giving this political rally speech to this huge crowd. And Chaplin, who is a master mimic, he does this faux German, this fake German throughout this all with the growl and the grunts and, das keine und Sauerkrauten, he just shaking his fist. And he gets Hitler's mannerisms down to a T. His facial expressions, his hand gestures, he's got all of that. And in the bottom right, there's this wonderful piece with the Jewish barber where he's listening to the radio in his barber shop to some classical music. And the Hungarian dance number 5 comes on, and he kind of coordinates all of the barber movements to the classical music. And that was wonderfully given tribute in the Bugs Bunny cartoon, Rabbit of Seville, who does a barber bit to Rossini's Barber of Seville in the same way. This was hugely successful, but it was not without controversy. Chaplin had basically said to America that we had a responsibility to get involved. And to isolationist America, this was not very popular. So there is a lot of controversy that builds up around The Great Dictator. Now, other controversy around Chaplin involved his personal life, and the man was no saint. I'm not going to come out and say that he wasn't. He had a situation in his public persona that was already insecure, and he did have outspoken liberal views. He had an appeal to leftist thinkers. He also refused to take on American citizenship. He never declared, he never went through that process of becoming an American national. And so the FBI did not look kindly on this. And as far as his personal life, he had romances and relationships, especially with ladies much younger than him, who caused a lot of stir. And he was married 4 times. His first time was to Mildred Harris. He was 29. She was 16 or 17. He was then again married, and this time to Lita Gray. He was 35. She was 16. Then he was married to Paulette Godard, who appeared in Modern Times. He was 47. She was 26. And then his final marriage, which lasts till his death in 1977, is Una O'Neill. And most people feel this really was the love of his life. She was dedicated to his vision and his career. They were a perfect set despite their age difference. She is the daughter of famous playwright Eugene O'Neill, and they had 8 kids together. His last kid was born when he was 73. So, all right. A lot of controversy around this guy. We talked about the political leftist view. We talked about his refusal for American, or I don't want to say refusal, but he never got around to becoming an American citizen, which many people had a problem with because this is where he made his fortune. And why doesn't he want to connect himself? And then, of course, the personal things. And all of this is going to come to a head in the next installment of Charlie Chaplin saga. He absolutely connected with the people of our day. I love the picture with him and Albert Einstein. And the bottom right, that's him on the set of a film called Sunnyside in 1919, and he is meeting Helen Keller for the first time. And he had a friendship with her. I don't know this for sure. I wonder if his friendship with Helen Keller had any inspiration to do with City Lights and that character. Again, don't quote me on that. I haven't read anything to prove that. But I just find that an interesting connection. All right, the Chaplin saga will continue. Things are getting kind of heated for Chaplin right now in his biography and career. He is making films that are going to continue to influence future filmmakers. Great dictator, greatly influential on all sorts of anti-war films and filmmakers like Mel Brooks or Woody Allen, Stanley Kubrick. So lots more to come as we close out the Chaplin saga in the next bit here. You guys have a great day. Make sure you've taken good notes and keep an eye out for postings.